2002, a suicide bomber walked into the Park Hotel in Netanya and detonated the explosive belt he'd strapped around his waist. 30 Israelis, who just moments earlier were celebrating the Seder of Passover, died. This attack came at the height of the Second Intifada. This Intifada that claimed lives of over 1,000 Israelis blowing up and exploding in Jerusalem, in Haifa, and Tel Aviv. And during that horrible month of March 2002, 130 Israelis were killed. At that point, if we go back in a time machine, the country was confused. The government seemed paralyzed and helpless. The so-called experts told us that there's no military way to defeat terror. I can still remember their voices. On Channel 2, on Channel 10, you hear them in and out. There's no military solution, it's only a political solution. The only way to stop these attacks, they claimed, was through diplomacy. If we just give up enough land, the terror would stop and there would be quiet. And this was sort of the common wisdom. They were dead wrong. 2 days after the Park Hotel massacre, the government, the Israeli government, launched Operation Chomat Magen, Defensive Shield, to stop the suicide bombers and retake control of the Palestinian cities in Judea and Samaria. And it worked, big time. Within weeks of the beginning of the operation, the number of attacks and Israeli casualties dropped by more than 80%. And then while it took a bit more time, we eventually succeeded in bringing down suicide bomber attacks down to zero. Yes, 0 suicide bomber attacks in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. The Israeli government and the Israeli nation proved that terror can be defeated. Today, Europe and the entire free world are facing the same threat with similar confusion and consternation. But my message today is that Europe and the free world can defeat terror too. And I'd like to share the lessons learned by us. Well, the first and biggest thing is to simply make the decision. To make the decision that we're going to fight. Europe has to set the goal of winning this war. And I want to emphasize this goal has not been set yet. Because without the willingness to commit force and resources, you can't win. What's happening in ground in Syria, and I'm very closely monitoring it, it's not real war. It's not real commitment. Sort of tango, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's a bit reminiscent of the beginning of the First World War. There was a period of 1 year between 1939 and 1940, which was called the Phony War, where actually nobody really engaged the Germans. This decision has not been made yet, and it needs to be made. The next step is to send in ground troops to fight the enemy, to really fight. Drones and tough words just won't cut it. What we have facing us is an extremely determined organization of roughly 40,000 fighters, very versatile. They have a big vision. The best visions are the simple visions. Their vision is their name, an Islamic State. It doesn't get easier to understand than that. They want an Islamic State in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Paris, in New York. They want to restore the greatness that they had roughly 1,400 years ago. Well, here's what we did. In 2002, we went on the offensive. And we returned into the cities of Nablus, Jenin, Yericho, Tulkarem, and we went house to house and door to door to hunt down terror suspects. It was not easy. We found and demolished bomb labs, arms caches, and terrorist command centers. I personally remember this period very well. I was a CEO of a startup company, high-tech company in New York, I got on the first plane back to Israel, flew back and joined my soldiers, and we fought to stop the terror wave that had struck our country. What I did, together with my friends, we captured terrorists at 3 a.m. in their beds at home so they wouldn't blow up at 3 p.m. on a bus in Jerusalem or a coffee shop in Tel Aviv. Listen, I know that boots on the ground is a scary phrase, and the Western world has gotten used to sterile attacks. But we need to be honest, the drones from far away and a few missiles won't do it. To win, the world needs to go on the offensive. There's no other way. What Israel did in 2002 is a model for how terror can be defeated. Now, I can understand the reluctance because it means that soldiers may be put in harm's way, but keep in mind that the number of civilian lives saved will be way, way higher. There's no substitute for having control on ground. Take a look at the amazing comparison between Gaza, Lebanon, and Judea and Samaria. We pulled out of Gaza in 2005, and we've been pounded since then by thousands and thousands of rockets. We go in, come out, go in, come out. We don't control the territory. Pulled out of Lebanon in 2000, and 6 years later, Hezbollah shot 4,000 missiles and rockets on our cities. And today they have no less than 150,000 missiles targeting our homes. We're not there. In Judea and Samaria, though, not a single rocket has been fired. Not one single rocket, not one single missile, not one single mortar. Ever asked why? Why is this? Why is Gaza so packed with the missiles, Lebanon so packed with rockets? The answer is simple. It's because the IDF is there on ground with the ability to go where it needs and when it needs to go. There's another myth that we were told about terror, and this is very important as well. We were told that terror is born out of despair. If we only tried to understand the motivation behind the terror, if we only gave them hope, it would stop. Wrong again. Terror is not born out of despair. It's born out of hope. The hope to take over Jerusalem, Paris, and the rest of the world and turn it into a grand caliphate. And only by extinguishing this hope can we defeat the terror. The terrorists who shot and murdered Yaakov and Netanel Littman last Friday, and the terrorists who carried out the attacks in Paris, no, they didn't do it out of despair. They attacked because they genuinely believed that if they put in enough effort to make our lives miserable, we'll just decide to pack up and go somewhere. This is what Nasrallah called the spider webs. He said Israel is like a spider web. It looks strong, but with your hand you can move it. When facing this kind of enemy, the answer has to be force, and there's no such thing as containment. In recent weeks, we in Israel have been facing a terror wave of a different sort, of knives primarily, on the streets, here in Jerusalem and throughout the country. This wave is rooted in incitement by the PA. I know that some ears here don't like to hear that, but it's reality. By the PA, by the northern branch of Islamic movement. They've invested tremendous efforts to convince and persuade the grassroots that Israel is about to blow up or destroy Temple Mount, which is blatantly false. I met some principals, great folks from Arab schools in Israel, and they genuinely believe it. I was shocked. These are folks that I highly respect them, but this incitement works. So when Abu Mazen spreads blood libels claiming that we've killed people who are still alive and being treated in our hospitals, when Sheikh Raed Salah lies that Israel is about to blow up Temple Mount, you don't sit down and talk to these people, you fight back. This is why I worked very hard over the past 2 months in the cabinet to get the cabinet to outlaw the northern branch of the Islamic movement, to revoke citizenship of terrorists and to once again demolish terrorists' homes. And I can now tell you that we've changed course in this battle. The Israeli government has changed course. It's been tough, but we have. And it's working. Earlier this week, the terrorist who killed Nfatali Bennett was turned in by his own father from fear of house demolishment. And now we know, while it didn't prevent him from the first attack, it did stop his next one. But it's also about not rewarding terrorism. Recently, Prime Minister Netanyahu tossed up the idea of unilateral steps. Let me be clear. I will do everything possible to prevent unilateral withdrawals, and I will do everything in my power to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state smack in the heart of Israel. My reasons are quite simple. First, it's going to be a failed state. You know, when you look around, the whole region is falling apart. The whole region is fragmented. Nation states are going back to tribal mode. Why would this one startup in such a difficult place, where actually things are not perfect, but they're nowhere as bad as what's going on in Syria, Iraq, and all around, why would the free world, the West, still try to twist our arm into importing the incredible failure into the heart of Israel? I just don't get it. And it's such a strong conception, and unfortunately only one thing will break this conception, and it's reality, because words won't do it. I have no doubt that a Palestinian state will be taken over by Hamas and become another launch pad for rocket and terror attacks against Israel. How do I know? Well, because it happened. Every time we did it, it happened. Every time we ceded a piece of land, it happened. In 95 to 2000, we handed over land to the PLO, and it turned into a launch pad of over 1,000 terror attacks. We did it in 05. First time it was with an agreement. In 05 it was unilateral, right? Did the same thing. We were promised Singapore in the Middle East, and we got hell. And you know what? There's also another reason. This land belongs to the Jewish people. This week, this Shabbat, Jews all around the world are going to read the Torah portion about Jacob's dream and the famous ladder where angels were climbing up and down. Well, where did it take place? Was it in Tel Aviv? Perhaps in Cholon? Maybe in Carmiel? No, it was in Beit El, just north of Jerusalem, in what some refer to as occupied West Bank. Let me be very clear. One cannot occupy his own home. But then people ask, so what do you propose? What can we do? And I'm going to say this again and again. I put a plan on the table. Is it perfect? By no means. It's an imperfect plan for a very imperfect situation. The plan is simple. Apply Israeli sovereignty on Area C, where there's roughly 450,000 Israelis and less than 100,000 Palestinians. Offer them full Israeli citizenship, but then we retain Ariel, Ma'ale Adumim, Ofra, Bet El, all of the Israeli-controlled areas. In areas A and B, provide an enhanced autonomy, if you will, autonomy on steroids, because we don't want to govern them. We don't want to run their schools. We don't want to take their taxes. We don't want to run their hospitals. They can do it. And work through. And you say, it's imperfect, they won't agree. Okay, we can do it unilaterally. And then work through it. Just don't make the situation worse, because it's not great, but it's certainly the best situation in the whole Middle East. The best place, second only to Israel itself, for Arabs to live is Judea and Samaria today. The Prime Minister spoke about keeping military control at all costs. And sort of the subtext is that while we can take away civilians, we have to retain military control. Here I also differ, and I want to explain. The reality is that where there are no Israeli citizens, there are no Israeli soldiers. You might sustain it for a few months, perhaps a couple of years. I was a soldier in southern Lebanon. Ultimately, we incurred about 15 to 25 deaths a year, losses a year in southern Lebanon. But because we have no claim, because there's no Jews living there day in, day out, no one riding the roads, no one keeping the channels of life open, we couldn't stay there. No place is sustainable, neither Jordan Valley or anywhere else, without Israeli citizens. Ultimately, soldiers won't stay there. I know how it works in Israel. Public opinion will be, why are we sacrificing anyway? There's no Jews. So it's important to understand what we call the settlers. They are Israel's defensive shield. What they're incurring today is defending Israel from the same things happening in Tel Aviv and Haifa. I want to end and say I'm incredibly optimistic about Israel. Look what's going on during this period. Man, we're growing. High-tech, 2 years ago, $2.5 billion of VC investments in startups. Last year, 3.6. This year, $4.5 billion of investment in Israeli startups. That's huge. We're exporting water technologies to India. We're getting dairy technologies in China, allowing medical technologies all around the world. We just heard these folks from the startup. And we're returning to our Jewish identity. And my vision for Israel is to be a lighthouse in this huge, huge Islamic storm. We're a lighthouse that pierces those clouds and shows the world how you can be surrounded by lethal enemies, yet be a light upon nation.